Hello out there, and it has been a while since I did any kind of video about a true budget knife, and so with that in mind, we are going to talk about the 10 things you need to know about the Kershaw Faultline number 8760. Starting with number 1, a unique blade shape. Question mark. A unique blade shape? Because when I first saw this knife, I did think it was very unique. You know, I looked at it, the pictures of it, and I saw this this flat that's sort of more down on the middle of the blade than you would expect it to be, and so you can understand why it's called the Faultline. And I just saw, you know, just the way that the swedge, I guess is what you're going to call this is, and the hollow grind, it just does have a very unique look, and then a lot of belly at the front, the way a number of like skinning knives might have. So, you know, something a little bit different than a lot of the budget stuff that you see out there, especially the recent budget stuff from Kershaw that has, you know, maybe more of a look like this that I'm more accustomed to. And so, yeah, I was definitely drawn to it. But then a number of people started sending me messages saying, hey, that's a J-cape, and that looks just like a J-cape. And I didn't know what a J-cape was, and I had to look it up, and I guess a J-cape is a pretty nice knife that has a very, very similar blade shape to this. And so I don't know if Kershaw sort of borrowed that, or if it's just a coincidence, or what. Doesn't seem like it was a collaboration or anything, but at the very least, there are a lot of design similarities with the blade, and from the reviews I've seen on the J-cape, that's definitely a good thing. So while I don't have an answer as to why that is, I can say that it is probably a beneficial thing for the knife. Now, moving on and talking more about the blade, number 2, making up for lost jimping. If you've ever had a Kershaw, bringing back this method again, that doesn't have jimping, and you thought, wow, I can't understand why there isn't any jimping. Well, here you go. They were hoarding it. Making up for lost jimping here with a ton of it all up and down the spine of this knife. And as you can see, if you take a look, we have a couple different types. So it's a little more spaced out, a little more sharp actually in the spot that you would expect to see it. And then up here, it's really close together and actually superior to the jimping here. So if the jimping down, you know, closer to, you know, the thumb ramp were more like this, it would actually be more ergonomic. Right now, as it is, it's a little bit sharp and does create a small hot spot, unless you have really heavily calloused thumbs, and then you'll be just fine. But a small hot spot that it takes a while to get used to. The stuff up here, we'll talk about the functionality of that in just a second. Some people might see it as unnecessary, but depending on what the applications are for this knife, it actually might be very useful. All right, moving on to number 3. Number 3, this is not a pageant queen. And that's not to say this isn't a good-looking knife. I mean, I think it's attractive, but Kershaw here seems to be getting back to what we traditionally might expect from a budget knife. You know, a lot of the stuff that Kershaw's been doing with like the fraction and again this method, the G10, they've got, you know, different kinds of materials that they're using, sort of upgrading their idea of what a budget knife is. But on this one, they go back to glass-filled nylon and a rubber inlay. And actually, even though it might not be the best looking thing, I like it. I like that they're doing this. I like what they're saying about what this knife is supposed to be for. You can see with the glass-filled nylon that it does scuff. You know, I've used it and dropped it, and, you know, it isn't going to be necessarily the most durable material when it comes to looks, but functionally, I think it's really good. Moving on to number 4, strength versus weight. Now, this is a strong knife for, you know, the size and the weight. And I think it's listed on Blade HQ and maybe a couple other sites at 3.9 ounces, and that might be just a typo. So I think this one is more like 3.5. Yeah, 3.54. So not a heavy knife, and for the size of it, let's see, I have a mini grip right here. So it's a little bit bigger than a mini grip in just about all dimensions. You know, you can see like the height of the blade, the length of the handle, all that good stuff. So it feels like a good substantial knife, a strong knife, and the weight isn't necessarily a bad thing. You know, sometimes when we have liners, and we do have nested liners that go all the way through this knife, sometimes when they're not milled, we think that it might be, you know, on a budget knife, the company cheaping out and just not wanting to pay to get it milled. And actually, in this case, I don't really think that's the issue. I think that the weight here is perfect as it is, and for the way that I use this knife and the applications that I see it for, I don't really think I'd want it to be any lighter than this. I think that it's at a very good weight to give it the strength and like I said, the substantial feeling that you would want it to have. All right, so moving on, number 5. What are the applications? Well, for me, I think that this is just a good EDC kind of like work knife. We're going to talk about the pocket clip and why that might be a hindrance to you being able to EDC this knife in a bit. But when it comes to just the blade shape and the way that it performs, I think that you could use this as like a knife that you have in your car or in your kit, just as an everyday work knife. You know, I know a number of people who like are in fields where they're using knives for their job every day, whether it's like heating and cooling or just like a lot of construction and stuff. And this might be something that you have in a toolbox. This is something that a lot of people that I know would really enjoy. If you do want to have a knife for, you know, skinning, I mean, I think that this would be pretty good for that. And I think that the jimping actually, you know, if you're going to use a knife in that kind of, you know, capacity, I think that holding the knife like this actually makes sense. You know, and so you can do a lot of detail work depending on what you're into, if it's skinning game or just any other kind of application where you need to hold a knife like this and really get good and choked up. I mean, this is extremely comfortable. Holding the knife like this is actually more comfortable than holding it like this. You just have to have a task that you need to hold a knife like this for, you know, and whether that's skinning or whatever else it might be, you know, if that's what works for you, then I think that this would be a good knife to have. Yeah, and we'll get back to the clip in just a second, but going on to number 6, shedding its coat. So I used this knife a lot when I first got it. Anyone who remembers my last D2 video might remember that I actually incorporated this into the tests. I used this just to see how the D2, after a little bit of use, would stand up to a brand new knife of 8CR13. And the D2 did excellent. The 8CR held its own and performed, but this black oxide coating didn't. You know, this coating is not going to stand up. And you might be able to see, and I'm going to do my very best to get it focused. You can see a bunch of scratches and stuff on here and just points where the coating is starting to wear. And yeah, that's after, you know, just 1 or 2 days of very consistent use, doling the edge. I've doled the edge on this twice and had to touch it up twice. So that's, you know, the kind of wear that you're going to see on this black oxide coating just from cardboard to this degree. You know, and with some knives, and I actually have it right here, the Paramilitary 2 with this DLC coating, sometimes when you have these spots, you think, oh man, this coating sucks, and it's just not holding up. And actually with this, it's just dirty. It just takes a while to get this off. It's just not easy to get these marks off, but it's not the coating wearing, it's just the way that it gets dirty and stays sticky. With this, it is actually wearing off, and it's going to wear off relatively quickly. So like I said, not a pageant queen. This is going to be a user, and it's going to look like a user relatively quickly. All right. Next, number 7, I believe we're on. Yeah, number 7, resharpens in seconds. So that's the really good thing about it. Like I said, I've used this knife down to dull on 2 occasions and sharpened within, like literally within a few seconds, a few passes on the sharp maker that I have. That's really what I use anytime that I get to the point where stropping isn't good. And yeah, the sharp maker, very simple, got a functional edge back on this thing in no time. So one of the benefits of 8CR, and certainly if you're using this knife as a work knife, being able to maintain it and get back to work, you know, at the end of the day, touch it up in no time and be good to go. That's an excellent thing. All right, number 8, switching to manual. And Kershaw has been doing a great job with this. One of the best things about this knife is that it has manual action. Just excellent manual action. It's a manual flipper. The D10 is very good. It's smooth. Doesn't necessarily like free drop, but for 25 bucks, just like that, I mean, that's excellent. And I've got to tell you, you know, I have a number of things that matter to me that when it comes to knives, they're sort of immeasurable, because I'll see those things and I'll realize, man, this really makes a huge difference. And I got to tell you, this knife being manual versus assisted completely changes the way that I think about it. If this had been assisted, it would just be another assisted Kershaw. And for some reason, the fact that this is manual, even though the functional use of the knife isn't really changed by that fact, it just makes me look at it in a completely different light, and it makes it so much more impressive that they're putting the KVT ball bearings on a knife that is so budget friendly. And yeah, I just really, really like that. I hope they continue to do it. And while they're going to keep making assisted opening knives, I'm sure, I hope they just keep giving us a good number of options with manual action. All right, number 9 is it's not even necessarily a negative, but it is a thing that you definitely want to be aware of, and it's the pocket clip and just the way this goes in and out of pocket. So in and out of pocket is number 9, and the clip is actually very good. It is sort of a take on a traditional deep carry Kershaw clip. We've seen these from them repetitively over the years, and it is only one position. And it does just have a couple issues going in and out of pocket because of the grippiness of this this rubberized, you know, inlay. Now, it is tough. And I mean, it's very tough to get in and out of pocket. It isn't easy. It's a pain in the ass. The only thing that I can say that might make it worth it is that for the people who are using this knife, my guess is when you take it out of your pocket, you're using it for a while before you put it back in. So, you know, if you're using this extensively, it might not be that big of a deal. Like I said earlier, though, I mean, one of the things that I really see this knife as is like a toolbox knife or a kit knife, you know, just something that you have, you know, in one of those capacities, maybe even in your car. And so you might not have to carry it if you use it in that, you know, in that field. For me, I've only EDC'd this knife and like left the house with it a few times. This knife is sort of what sits around and is just an around the house kind of user at this point. And so for me, this doesn't bother me whatsoever. If you're thinking about applying this though as your EDC knife, you might want to maybe think about a different way, or maybe carry it loose in the pocket if that's something that you do. But just keep that in mind. I mean, it is extremely difficult to get in and out of the pocket. So not a deal breaker for me just because of the other ways that I see this knife being used, but it is definitely a negative aspect. All right. And finally, number 10, budget done right. Budget knives, and not to be critical of knives like the Method or the Fraction or the Atmos or the other stuff that Kershaw's doing, but sometimes with a budget knife, you don't need all of like the nice carbon fiber laminates and all of the other like fancy stuff. Sometimes with a budget knife, you're just looking for a knife to use and beat up, and you're not worried about something being fancy. And I think this is a perfect example of that. $25. I think that if Kershaw continues to make knives like this at the $25 price point, and like I said, with the other models that we have that are options at that price point, if they continue to do stuff like this, they're always going to be able to find a market for their knives. I mean, this knife is a very good budget knife that is competitive in functionality with most of the other stuff that I see on the market at $25. So I'm impressed with it. I'm really happy that I picked it up. And yeah, I just like the way that it performs, and I just like the whole concept of what they did here. So that is it, guys. Those are the 10 things you need to know about the Kershaw Faultline. Any other questions, comments, complaints, suggestions, definitely let me know down below. I appreciate you watching, and I'll talk with you soon. Take care.